So I'm jumping around again. A little earlier in Durable Inequalities on pages 19 and 20, Tillys says that instead of imagining culture as an autonomous sphere in which ideas change ideas, which then constrain behavior, structural and institutional analyses treat culture as shared understandings and their representations. Actors operate within frames of understanding constructed by previous interactions, anticipating one another's responses on the basis of those frames and modifying their strategies as a consequence of shared experiences. All right. So the idea of culture being important to durable inequalities is certainly there. And we can talk about different ways of thinking about culture, but let's think about the different levels first of all. Is there a world culture? And by world culture, I don't mean a homogeneous, we all march to the beat of the same drummer type culture. I mean a set of shared expectations, traditions, and rituals. Yeah, there are in a lot of different areas, and we can think of what that would look like related to education specifically. Are there national or regional cultures? Well, yes, there are. They tend to do the same thing, a set of shared expectations, set of taken for granted rituals or activities that are often symbolic in nature. Yeah. Are there localized or individual cultures? Yes. Can all these be related to education? Yes. Can all of them have some sort of input related to inequality and equality and the certain divisions based on race or ethnicity or socioeconomic status or gender or any of the other large categories we often think of related to inequality? Yes. Okay. So he says, starting here, instead of imagining culture as an autonomous sphere in which ideas change ideas, in other words, we're not going to keep this in the abstract level. He says that's a bad idea to just keep it at the abstract level. He says instead, and let me take the ink off of here so that we can see it a little more clearly, instead, structural and institutional analyses treat culture as shared understandings and their representations. Okay, shared understandings, let's just say, for the sake of argument, related to education and their representations, so in education, because that's our focus. He goes on to say that actors operate within frames of understanding, so here we have that actor idea, constructed by previous interactions. This is habitus. Anticipating one another's responses on the bases of those frames and modifying their strategies as a consequence of shared experiences. All right, so previous interactions, anticipation of what other people are going to do, and modifying your strategies based on those shared experiences. In other words, everything that we do as we move through life is somehow related to this concept of habitus, this idea that we have all worked within this framework of cultural understanding and application in our own global and national and local cultures. Right? And that's what keeps us moving forward. So it's not this autonomous abstract culture. It's a real, it's an implemented, and it is an active culture. So how do structural and institutional ideas about culture make more sense than maybe other ideas about culture? Well, one way is to think about how organizations sort of fit together in the implementation of inequality. So on page 54, Tilly provides around page 54, he provides an explanation of scripting. He provides an explanation of shared local knowledge. So scripting is often another term for that is modeling. So a script or model for education, again, where does that script or model reside? At the global level, at the national or system level? at the local level or at a combination of all of those. And then shared knowledge or expectations which are taken for granted and are based in lived experiences. Sorry, handwriting is horrible. I'm doing this with my finger on my screen because I don't have my little writing pad with me here in China. Okay, and he says that the more scripting, the more we're going to go from avoidance to ritual, and the more shared knowledge, the more we're going to go from what he's calling shallow improvisation to deep improvisation. Okay? And if you move together, if you have both of these going up, then you end up over here, intense ritual. So, you can tell where I'm going to go with this probably. Where does the formal education system fall in this? Well, is it scripted? Is education, formal education, scripted? Right? Is there a model at the global, the national, and the local level, even though they might contradict one another to some degree, or maybe they look a little bit more like concentric circles, where the global's out here, the national's here, and the local's inside, and each of them contextualizes the other, and so that there's a flow both in and out. Okay. I would argue that there's pretty intense scripting that takes place as a result of formal education. How about shared local knowledge? Is it all the model? Is it all sort of abstract? Is it all structure? Really, that's a better word than abstract. Is it all structure-based or rhetoric-based or policy-based? Absolutely not. Who has shared expectations and shared knowledge? Well, teachers and students, because they come from the same community. Who has taken for granted expectations about behavior and about content and about interactions and relationships? Well, people who work together in schools because they come out of the community. They don't live in a vacuum at school. Okay, so we have this lived experience. I don't know if you can still see, that's what I wrote there. This lived experience that is shared at the individual or the classroom or the school and community level, and it's very intense. So even though it may fit in the overall curriculum of an education system at whatever level, it is still going to be adapted and adopted and coupled either loosely or tightly to that model based on shared local knowledge. There's a lot of autonomy and there's a lot of flexibility at the local level in education systems to reflect this. So if we have high shared local knowledge and high scripting, we're going to have intense rituals as a result. That is our formal education system. Okay, well, how does this play into the idea of inequality and generating inequality? Well, let's go back just a little bit. Remember idea from my last video about organizational innovations. Organizational innovations, and I gave the example of policies and structural policies in particular. Right, organizational innovations have the opportunity to actually change the way that this ritual operates in terms of establishing or solving or lessening inequality. Right, that's going to be important. How does that actually work? Well, let's take a look. So here I am in Saudi Arabia. I do quite a bit of work, as I think several of you know, in Saudi Arabia, mostly related to testing. You can see this is from a TIMS workshop. This is from an assessment. It says assessment behind Lawrence Ingverson there. And this guy is the Deputy Minister for Educational Development and Planning, and I do quite a bit of work in collaboration with Naif al-Rumi in order to think about education and testing in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. One of the things I've been sort of interested in as I work with them is the establishment of what they're calling Tatweer smart schools. Tatweer is a word meaning development, and so there are Tatweer Smart Schools that were established throughout the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia as a pilot study. 50 schools, in fact, and you can see a map here of Saudi Arabia and where these 50 schools were established. This lists 1 through 25. Just think of it this way. There's a boys' and a girls' school for each of these dots. So there actually is 2 times 25, which is 50. And the Tatweer Smart School strategy was to create or to promote the infusion of technology in education in order to build a knowledge society. And the idea would be that starting with knowledge acquisition, students and teachers would get knowledge and skills through information and communication technology, that there would be an application of knowledge that would allow them to engage in critical thinking and problem-solving activities, which would eventually lead to this idea of knowledge creation. And this is really where you get the knowledge economy or the knowledge society idea, where the people become producers or creators of knowledge. The always interesting thing to me, though, was that there is complete gender separation between boys and girls, and we've talked about this in class before. So the question I have continually asked is, are there durable gendered inequalities in Saudi Arabia, specifically in relation to the ICT, the technology-based reform? Well, what's interesting, structurally, you don't see a whole lot of difference in access, you don't see a whole lot of difference in performance, and you don't see a lot of difference in opportunity. So, if we talk about organizational innovation, it has happened, right? There is enrollment parity, there is achievement parity, and there is no significant gender differences in opportunities to learn. I say in many nations here, I'm talking about the Arabian Gulf. This is from another study I did. So, but you still have this idea that there's a highly scripted education system, and yet there is an intense amount of shared local knowledge, which often relates to knowledge of local culture. And one of the things that I've been interested in is how gender inequality or gender segregation persists even when we have equality of activity. This would be the access or enrollment, performance, and opportunity to learn. There is, equality is a strong word, let's say parity. Parity of activity. What there is much less of, and let me change colors for my little pointer so that it becomes more obvious. What there is less of is equality of the individual, because there is a completely separate set of systems for boys and girls in Saudi Arabia, which I find interesting, right? And this all comes, you can't see down here off the screen, there's a reference to some work that I used to look at this sort of mix between equality of activity and individual, which if you're interested in, I can share with you some other time. I've been using a lot of the work from Drury's Technoscapes, which I believe is one of the books that we're looking at in this class. So Technoscapes means a rearrangement of social contacts through and by technology. They tend to transcend national barriers, but they also tend to sort of go along with something that's called the digital divide. The ways that this looks at the ways that technology actually creates or reproduces inequality. So, as Drury argues, these are exclusionary mechanisms, these technoscapes, because they exclude all those who lack access to ICT or basic skills to use ICT, or who perform only basic functions with ICT. And the question is there a gendered, durable inequality around the use of ICT? Because it is categorical inequality, right? You've got boys, you've got girls. That's a pretty clear dichotomy. So I looked at some of the TIMSS data, the Trends in International Math and Science Study data, to look if there is any way to see ICT as ameliorating, in other words, making better, or exacerbating, making worse, durable gendered inequalities in the Gulf Cooperation Council. Let me just look at this. And maybe we'll stop there with this. I won't show you, unless you're dying to see the tables. What I found was that there is a remarkably level playing field in schools, right? The script between nationals and expats, boys and girls, which is what I'm specifically interested in talking to you, and